So the Chinese government is sanctioning Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, which, I have to find kind of funny because I just kind of enjoy when people pick on Marco Rubio. But this isn't a case of that. This isn't somebody making fun of him. This is the case of the Chinese government recognizing him and Ted Cruz as their enemy. Apparently this is because Rubio and Cruz came up with some, I can never say the name of the province, it's like Xinjiang or something. It's the one in the way far west, northwest, where all the Muslim Uyghurs live. The Uyghurs call it East Turkestan because I guess they identify with Turkey and the Turkic tribes. They have a separatist flag, it looks like the flag of Turkey, but baby blue instead of red. It's actually kind of nice looking. But anyway, I don't really want to focus on the plight of the Uyghurs and whatever the Hawks are talking about specifically. In this case, the China Hawks. I assume it has to do with, because I'll be fair, I didn't read their bill, but I assume it has something to do with the concentration camps and the alleged organ harvesting and all this stuff, and the re-education camps. I don't know if they necessarily concentration camps because I believe people do come out of them. They're more like Soviet-style camps, not necessarily like Nazi-style camps. But of course, if we're debating whether you've got Soviet or Nazi-style camps, you're in a really bad place. Okay, so not good people. I'm not a fan of the Chinese government. I've said it before. I'd be very happy if the government of Beijing split into a million pieces and all these different components of China, whether it be Manchuria or Tibet or East Turkestan or any of these other places, just broke off and became their own thing. I'd be very happy with that. The world would be a better place. Because, of course, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I've said the same thing about the U.S. If the U.S. split into 5 pieces, it would be great. If the U.S. split into 10 pieces, it'd be even better. If the U.S. split into 50 pieces, it'd be even better than that. But preferably, the U.S. would split into like 1,000 pieces, like the Holy Roman Empire. And I, of course, would say the same thing about China. So these China Hawks are not, don't, rub me the wrong way, because I just love China. Quite the opposite. The reason why they rub me the wrong way is because I think that they underestimate the hold that China really has on us. You see, and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio might not necessarily be in this camp since they're more of the traditional neoliberal types who are very much in favor of global international trade. But the protectionists especially, or more nationalistic people, seem to think that, oh my God, China's ripping us off. They've got us over a barrel, but we've got the real advantage because they need us as a trading partner. Although even the neolibs say that. They say, what would China do if we didn't buy all our stuff? And so the nationalists say, well, we've got all this purchasing power, so we should just use that power to buy American and cut the Chinese out and hurt China. Whereas in reality, that's not how capitalism works, and that's because that's not how reality works. The money that we have isn't what gets us stuff. What gets us stuff is, our ability to sort of coax the goods that are produced away from the people who produce them. And so in this case, China, well, think about what we trade with China. We have a huge trade deficit. What does that mean? Well, having a huge trade deficit means we send a lot more money to them than we do goods. It's called a deficit because in the balance of trade internationally, people think of it as, well, you're paying for imports with exports. So in order to import stuff from other countries, you need to export stuff. That is ultimately how you're paying for it. So if you're running a trade deficit, what that means is that you're just sending out paper money. You're not sending out goods to pay for that. And so it's called a deficit because the idea is, well, if you're sending your money out into the rest of the world, well, people in China can't buy things with dollars. So they're going to use those dollars to buy things in America. So it's sort of a deferred payment because the idea is, well, eventually they will come to collect in the form of purchasing goods from America, or perhaps even, hard assets, real estate, businesses. Doesn't necessarily have to be consumer goods, even though that's what we're buying from China. But, of course, if China really did try and take all the dollars that they have and spend them over here, it wouldn't go over too well because the U.S. doesn't produce very much. I guess the Chinese could buy assets, that's true, but they really couldn't buy goods. We can't pay for our imports through exports because we just don't really have anything to export. We have a service-oriented economy. So in actuality, we're the ones ripping off the Chinese. It's not the other way around, because China sends us all of these consumer goods, things that have to be made, things that are made of scarce resources. They have to take their rare earth minerals and things and turn those into goods. They ship them over here, and what do we ship them back? Green pieces of paper, of which we have a limitless supply. I mean, if that wasn't obvious enough to people as it was, looking at what the Fed's done over the last couple months since this crisis started, sending the balance sheet through the roof, should show you just how not scarce, or that's not really a correct term, but I'll run with it for now, just how plentiful dollars can be. And there's no real goods that you can buy in America with that. Those dollars are really only good to buy things around the world. And so America doesn't really have a lot of wealth. What we have is goodwill, people who are willing to accept our money, but we don't have, real economic power. And, you could say, well, China, they've got this, massive, sort of pseudo-communist system that's not going to be very efficient. And that's true. I'm not saying that the Chinese economic model is the greatest in the world, but considering the size of China, even if they have a very, they have an economy that's very much bogged down by the state, they've still got a lot of capital goods. They've got hard factories and things that can produce stuff. They have labor. If they've proven anything over the last 30 years, it's that they have the means to produce goods. And that really, in my view, is what makes you a rich country. Because if the rest of the world disappeared tomorrow, you would say, oh, well, that'd be a disaster for China because China would lose their export markets. Well, you could say it might be a disaster for some certain Chinese producers because they wouldn't have as many people to sell to. But the folks in China themselves would be just fine because there would be plenty of goods to go around because they already produce everything there. They could just, consume these things domestically. They wouldn't even have to produce as much. They would have they would be way over capacity. I think Peter Schiff made a good analogy recently about this. He was talking about how, during World War II, the Keynesian economists in America were concerned that after the war, well, the U.S. would have an economic collapse because, all this demand that was created by the war, and all these people only had jobs because the war was going on, and so they thought we needed an endless war to keep things going. Well, afterwards, when the war ended, the standard of living in America didn't collapse. It went through the roof because we had this massive productive capacity and an ability to produce things for ourselves. And so Americans got richer, they didn't get poorer, and the same thing may very well happen to the Chinese. Now, I don't know that for sure because there's plenty of other factors that would affect that. But what I do know for a fact is that if there was, a real break in relations between the U.S. and China, who would not benefit would be the United States. The standard of living in our country would certainly collapse because not only would it be more expensive to produce things in the United States if we had to produce things for ourselves right now because we don't really have much of a capacity to do that at all. We rely on imports. It would also take a very long time. So it's not just some switch that you can flip on and off, and then all of a sudden, all of our production's back in America. And so for a time, you might not be able to really get certain things at all. And then when you are able to get them, it will be at a significantly higher price. In other words, if you remove all of these Chinese goods that the U.S. has the ability to buy, well, then the dollar has a lot less value because there's a lot less that the dollar can buy. We all would become much poorer because the money that we have would be able to buy a lot less in real terms. And so I understand why people, would not be fond of China and things like that. But I think it's very irresponsible for folks not to consider and not to, sort of level with their voters that, what exactly truly splitting from China means. Because it's something that I think, frankly, most Americans would not tolerate. That would be just something that would spark even more civil unrest because, people will be restless if their standard of living plummets. And so if you're someone who wants to preserve the Union, who wants to keep America alive, and you want to address this issue, you would do it in a very nuanced and perhaps a very limited way because, the more you do this, the more you're just sort of poking the bear. You're almost asking for the country to collapse in on itself. And this, I have to say, is the most remarkable thing, I think, about American leaders. Perhaps if you look throughout history, the same could be said for leaders of other countries, but the seeming lack of regard for the integrity of, or rather the durability, the endurance of the country. Nobody seems to be concerned about preserving their government, which again, I don't mind because I don't like our federal government. But I just would have to think that if I were in their position, I would want to preserve these institutions, not do everything I can to make them, collapse and crumble. I guess it really just is, the hubris of American exceptionalism that, it can't happen here. America will always be around. There's nothing that we can do to destroy it. So anyway, with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.